Insists on evacuation. Hamas is stopping Gazan civilians from leaving and Egypt is not allowing them to enter. Also, what's the status on the northern front? Is Hezbollah joining this war? How much firepower has the US deployed in support of Israel? We look at American military assets in the region. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are meeting in a few hours from now. Where do they stand on the Israel-Hamas war? Who do they support? And where does India stand? We'll discuss that too. Also revisit the debate on who is a terrorist and why there should be no doubt that Hamas is a terrorist group. Plus the wider fallout of this war and the surge in hate crimes the world over. The headlines first. As the war enters week 2, stocks picked up and oil steadied in markets across the globe. Investors remain wary about chances of this war spreading. Any spillover could lead to a surge in oil prices. Exit polls suggest a political earthquake in Poland. The ruling right-wing party, Law and Justice Party, could lose majority. The Liberal opposition is already claiming victory. This is led by Donald Tusk, a former chief of the European Union, this party. The Polish election saw the highest turnout since the fall of communism. After China, Russia suspends Japanese seafood imports. It comes after Tokyo's release of Fukushima nuclear plant wastewater. Japan insists that the wastewater is safe and treated, but countries like China cite lack of nuclear wastewater data. Australia fines X, formerly Twitter, for failing to crack down on child abuse content. Canberra has issued a fine of more than $380,000 for not cooperating with the investigation. Last year, Elon Musk had said that removing child exploitation was his top priority, but X has failed to tackle it. And it's official, cricket will return to the Olympics in 2028 in Los Angeles. Cricket was last played in the 1900 Olympics in Paris. The decision to include the game in its T20 format was announced in India. This will mark its return to the Games after 128 years. It's day 10 of the Israel-Hamas war. We are looking at 4 key questions tonight. 1. How and where can Gazans go for safety? 2. Why hasn't Israel begun the ground offensive yet? 3. Is Iran going to join this war? And 4. What has America's diplomatic outreach to Arabs achieved so far? Let's start with Gaza. It is under fire. Thousands of people are trying to cross over to Egypt. They've gathered at the Rafah crossing, but Egypt refuses to open it. Earlier today, there were reports of a deal, a ceasefire in Gaza, but Israel and Hamas have denied it. Also, Hamas says the people of Gaza will not leave, and Egypt says they cannot enter their territory. So where and how will civilians in Gaza go? At this point, they're focusing on the Rafah border crossing. It's the link between Gaza and Egypt. If Rafah is opened, Gazans can flee to Egypt, to the Sinai Desert. Do you know how many people we are talking about here? Possibly 1.1 million Gazans looking to leave. But Egypt does not want them. And their argument is quite simple. What if this exodus is permanent? What if Israel refuses to let these refugees back into Gaza? What if Palestinians remain in Egypt forever? Cairo doesn't want that. So it's proposing an alternative. Let aid pass through Rafah into Gaza and then Egypt will open the crossing. Earlier today, there were reports of a deal. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken appeared confident. He said Egypt would reopen the border. Listen to this.
We have put in place, and Egypt has put in place, a lot of material support for people in Gaza. And Rafah will be open. We're putting in place with the United Nations, with Egypt, with Israel, with others, the mechanism by which to get the assistance in.
Apparently, Israel had agreed to a truce, a pause in the fighting. They were ready to give a window, and this was supposed to be used to open the border crossing to let people and aid through. But now both Israel and Hamas have rejected this claim. They say no truce. So time is running out in Gaza because Israel cannot delay their ground offensive endlessly. They will have to take a call soon. In fact, just a short while back, Israel's parliament convened. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to the lawmakers. He called for a crushing victory over Hamas. Listen to this.
Our goal is victory, a crushing victory over Hamas, toppling its rule and removing its threat to the state of Israel once and for all. The conditions for victory, unity and determination. The people are united, the army is united, and the country's leadership is united.
We've heard similar comments all of last week. But why hasn't Netanyahu given the green light? What is delaying Israel's ground offensive? A political decision. And perhaps this is something to do with the US. Remember, America has thrown its weight behind Israel. President Biden has promised full support. But on Sunday, he signaled some restraint too. Biden said Israel's occupation of Gaza would be a mistake. Listen in.
I think it'd be a big mistake. Look, what happened in Gaza, in my view, is Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas don't represent all the Palestinian people. And I think that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza again. But to going in and taking out the extremists, the Hezbollah is up north, but Hamas down south is a necessary requirement.
So invasion okay, occupation not okay. That's the message from President Biden. Now we don't know what Israel's plan is. Their ambassador to Washington says there is no plan to occupy Gaza. It's only limited to taking out Hamas. Another big factor that would determine Israel's response is Iran. Will Iran join this war? That remains a big question. Well, Iran has issued a threat. They will get involved in the war if Israel invades Gaza. That's Iran's position right now. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will want assurances, maybe a commitment from the US before he launches the ground offensive. And what does the US say? It is talking to regional stakeholders. America's foreign minister is on a diplomatic shuttle. His name is Antony Blinken. And these are the places that he's visited in the last 4 days. Qatar, Bahrain, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the UAE and West Bank. Basically, most of the Arab world. And now he's back in Israel. What do you think he's trying to do? Get the Arab players on board with America. That is Blinken's key responsibility right now. And it has not been easy. Reports say the Saudi Crown Prince kept him waiting for long before coming for the meeting. So we're waiting to see what assurances, if any, Blinken has managed to get on this tour. And as casualties rise in Gaza, the elbow room will shrink for America and its Arab partners, which is why Israel is emphasizing on evacuations to limit the casualties. They're asking people to leave. At the same time, they continue the airstrikes. The death toll in Gaza is more than 2,700. Most of these are civilians, 2,700. In Israel, the toll is around 1,400. So put together, more than 4,100 people have lost their lives. And in Gaza, it is expected to rise. Most hospitals have run out of medicines. They're even rationing water supplies to patients. Same with UN agencies. The United Nations has around 13,000 workers in Gaza. 14 of them have been killed. The rest have been displaced. So the UN has stopped giving humanitarian assistance. No aid, no services. They've highlighted the shortage of 2 items, water and body bags. It tells you how bad the situation is. And despite that, many families are scared to evacuate. Do you know why? Because even the so-called safe roads are not safe. Israel has asked nearly 1 million Gazans to leave, and they have designated 2 roads for these refugees to use. 2 safe roads. But even those roads were bombed over the weekend. Around 70 people died in that attack. So the message from Gaza is this: nowhere is safe.
There is no safety. Even when you're at the crossing, you're afraid. On our way to the crossing, they shelled Rafah Street and we started screaming. We came to the crossing and thought it was safe. Nothing is safe in Gaza. Wherever we go, there's shelling, crying, screaming and blood.
These pictures are heartbreaking. Children are being pulled out of the rubble. Refugee shelters are being flattened. The Arab world cannot ignore these pictures, not any longer. At the same time, Israel cannot ignore these pictures. Pictures of Hamas's brutality from last week. Some body cam footage has emerged from the terror attack. You can see Hamas firing indiscriminately at civilians. They were published by the Israeli army, these videos. And I must tell you, it's tough to watch. Viewer discretion is advised.
هاي بوابته وقفوا غاد هاي بوابته وحش بيحنا وحش سنديلك روح ارمي روح سيبني وقف هات اغراض هات افتح هات اغراض هات اغراض دروع ارمي يلا ها اهدوا يا اولاد مين هاد مش سامع.
That was the brutality of last week's attack. So Israel wants revenge, like any country would, but the limits of that revenge are being tested. The Arab world will rally against Gaza's invasion and the US will not support Gaza's occupation. So Prime Minister Netanyahu has to take a call now. The need to dismantle Hamas on one side and a political and military Pandora's box on the other. Now let's talk about the people who began this round of violence. The Hamas leadership, they planned the attack. They must have known the risks. But they gave the go-ahead anyway. Do you wonder why? Because these so-called leaders had little to lose. They knew they will not be paying the price. They knew their own families would not be in the line of fire. I'm sure you already know this. The senior Hamas leadership is living the good life. They do not live in Gaza. They're safe with their families in other parts of the world. They don't have to face the Israeli airstrikes on Gaza. Instead, they hold high-level meetings and give speeches. They dictate the life and death of civilians in Gaza from their five-star safe havens. The definition of armchair generals. And one man exemplifies this, Ismail Haniyeh, the Qatar-based chairman of the Hamas Political Bureau. Here he is in a literal armchair, seated next to Iran's foreign minister. They had a meeting in Qatar's capital, Doha, on Saturday. It was all smiles and congratulations. Iran's foreign minister reportedly praised the October 7th attack. He apparently called it a quote-unquote historic victory. And Ismail Haniyeh said this.
This strategic strike, the resistance strike, which recorded a glorious page in the history of our Palestinian people.
What victory? What glory are they talking about? Thousands of people have died, thousands more stand to lose their lives. And these are innocent civilians who are just going about their lives, both in Israel and in Palestine. Now a war is going on. Israel is asking Gazans to leave. The Israeli army will commence its ground operation any time now. It is telling people to evacuate North Gaza, and the residents of North Gaza want to flee. They want to move south, perhaps even cross into Egypt. But Egypt doesn't want them, and Hamas leaders say they should not go.
There will be no migrating from Gaza and no migrating from the West Bank. No migrating from Gaza to Egypt. And here I would also like to salute the stance of our siblings in Egypt, who maintain that Egypt is indeed a country and is a sibling and a refuge, and is welcoming to the Palestinian people, but not on the grounds of migration or displacement. And neither of us can ever accept that. And I say to my siblings in Egypt, our decision is to stay in our country. So your decision is our decision.
You heard him. There will be no migrating from Gaza. Our decision is to stay in our country. That's what the Hamas leader says. The problem is, he himself is not in Gaza. Ismail Haniyeh divides his time between Qatar and Turkey. These are his two bases, and he keeps moving between the two. Same for his family. They do not stay in Gaza either. Most of them left in 2019. Some of them have Turkish passports. In fact, many senior leaders of Hamas have Turkish passports so they can move freely. But they're asking ordinary Gazans to stay put. Let me give you an important statistic. Before the war broke out, unemployment rate in Gaza was more than 60%, but Hamas leaders are millionaires. Their children are real estate tycoons with businesses in multiple countries. And this has led to resentment in the past. So what is Hamas's excuse? They say Ismail Haniyeh is on a foreign tour to rally support, that he's not abandoned Gaza, he's just traveling for the Palestinian cause. It's funny how long these tours last, long enough to escape any danger and consequences, also long enough to get foreign passports. Ismail Haniyeh's family has regularly been accused of corruption. They've reportedly made millions of dollars. They travel around the world. And now the same man is telling the people of Gaza to stay and face the bullets. The hypocrisy is staggering, though it's not limited to this man. Other senior Hamas leaders are also thriving in foreign nations, like Deputy Chairman Saleh al-Aruri. He's more often seen in Turkey than in Gaza, and he's always quick to give a soundbite to the press, always talking big about duty and sacrifice, from their gilded armchairs in fancy hotels and conference halls. In fact, this hypocrisy spans most militant organizations. The Taliban leadership does not allow women to study, but their own daughters are studying in schools and universities abroad. Kashmiri separatists shut down schools in the valley, but their children went abroad to get an education. Everywhere you look, the game is rigged. Different rules for ordinary people, special privileges for the leaders and their families.
Today we stand with all pride and dignity before this valiant resistance on the land of Gaza and extend into all of the land of Palestine.
He said he stands with pride and dignity, but he doesn't stand among the people of Gaza. His children live lavish lifestyles while ordinary Gazan children starve, and that is a fact. Haniyeh and the rest do not face hardships with them. Instead, they're happy to send Palestinians to their graves while they bask in the glory of their sacrifice. Vantage continues after a short break.
The God love us, and we are the hero, not the Hamas. Because the Hamas are very bad people, and the God don't like bad people.
So you had your family here who used to live here?
No,
They have
this
gone?
is the house of my father and my mother.
Okay.
They dead, so I live there.
Okay. So most of the neighborhood people have fled?
Yeah.
Where have they gone?
They gone to Eilat, Tel Aviv, Dead Sea. Yeah.
Okay. So aren't you scared of living here alone?
No, really no, because I trust the God. The God love the people. They good, not bad.
Many of the Israelis have very fond connection with India, and many of them know India very well. She's also very fond of in the movies. What movies do you like, ma'am?
Sangam.
Sangam.
Yeah.
Okay, could you sing
I
that
never
for us?
forget it.
Okay, so when did you watch Sangam?
Sangam in Zerot, in the cinema, yes.
Which year?
About 30 years, maybe 30 years.
And you still remember the movie?
Yeah.
Okay. And talking about India, if you like, the Indians also lived in Zerot?
Yeah.
How many Indians in Zerot?
Now let's look at what's happening in the north of Israel. It is emerging as another front in this war. And the reason is another non-state actor, the Hezbollah.
Sporadic fire across the Israel-Lebanon border over the past week has raised concerns that fighting with Hamas militants in Gaza could escalate into a broader conflict.
You heard the Israeli defense minister. They're worried about a bigger conflict And we will tell you why in some time. But first, let's look at the latest developments. The Israel-Lebanon border has already seen some unrest. Hezbollah has fired rockets. Israel has hit back with mortar fire. Basically, there have been several exchanges of fire. And a journalist was killed. He was hit by Israeli shelling. A few others were injured. So Tel Aviv is no longer taking any chances. It has sent a large chunk of soldiers to the border with Lebanon. It is also evacuating citizens from the northern villages. Anyone living within 2 kilometers of the Lebanese border is being asked to leave by Israel. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu even had a warning for Hezbollah. This is what he said.
היעד שלנו הוא ניצחון.
And I also have a message for Iran and Hezbollah. Don't test us in the north. Don't repeat the mistake you already made once. Because today, the price you will pay will be much heavier. President Biden told you in English, don't do it. And I tell you the same thing in Hebrew. Be careful.
Don't test us. That's what the Israeli Prime Minister said. But the situation still remains tense. Will this expand into a bigger conflict? Here's what the Hezbollah say.
ولن تؤثر الاتصالات في الكواليس.
We as Hezbollah contribute to the confrontation, and we will contribute to it within our vision and our plan. We follow the moves of the enemy, and we are fully ready. When the time comes for any action, we will carry it out.
So the Hezbollah is ready. The question is, will they join the war? And why is this so critical? To understand that, you have to look at the larger picture. Who is the Hezbollah? It's a militant group based in Lebanon. The name Hezbollah means Party of God. It was founded in 1982 during the Lebanese Civil War. In 1985, they released a manifesto. It stated 3 main objectives. Number 1, expulsion of colonizers from Lebanon. Number 2, the destruction of Israel. And number 3, the allegiance to Iran. Now, like Hamas, the Hezbollah have 2 wings, a military wing and a political one. So while Hezbollah may be a non-state actor, they're deeply entrenched in Lebanese politics. They're an important political player in Lebanon. They provide aid and social services. And this is in a country that is dealing with a crippling economic crisis. And that reflects in their support. 89% of Lebanese Shiite Muslims support the Hezbollah. That's almost 30% of the country's population. So they enjoy widespread support at home. Plus, they also enjoy support from abroad, from a country that backs and funds them. That country is Iran. Both Hamas and Hezbollah are part of a so-called axis of resistance. These are groups in Lebanon, Syria and Palestine that oppose Israel. And all these groups are backed by Iran. So a lot of similarities between Hamas and Hezbollah, but when it comes to firepower, Hamas is no match. The Hezbollah has around 100,000 fighters. That's according to their leader, Hassan Nasrallah. Other reports suggest the actual figures are much lower. Even then, it is a formidable army. They have a sizable arsenal, some 130,000 rockets. And these are not just any rockets, these are precision-guided missiles. That's what the Hezbollah have. And some reports say that they also have more weapons than the Lebanese army. Their fighters are battle-hardened. They fought in wars in Syria and Yemen. So to sum it up, the Hezbollah is widely popular. It has Iranian support. It has formidable arsenal. And it has all the reasons to enter this war. So what is stopping them? Lessons from history. In 2006, Israel and Hezbollah fought a bloody war. 1,200 died in Lebanon, 160 died in Israel. That was a war that went on for 34 days. The Hezbollah suffered a loss. In 2006, their leader Nasrallah even talked about it. He said when Hezbollah attacked Israel, they did not know it would escalate to this level. They did not want a war. And since then, the Israel-Lebanon border has been relatively calm. But now the Hezbollah has its finger on the trigger. If they pull it, it would plunge the region into a wider conflict. Israel says they're prepared for it, that they've already warned Hezbollah and Iran, but Lebanon is perhaps not prepared to deal with the consequences. They're already suffering an economic crisis. A war will cripple their economy, and that is perhaps the crux of the issue. So it's wait and watch for now. The risk of a 2 or 3 front war is all too real. Israel may not be able to handle it alone, but it never has had to. There's always big Uncle Sam that's got its back. Last week, we spoke about the US strategy in Israel, about how Washington is backing Tel Aviv both militarily and diplomatically. And so far, the US has walked the talk. One of America's most lethal weapons is already near Israel. An aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford. Another one is on its way, the USS Dwight Eisenhower. It should reach the eastern Mediterranean in a few days. These carriers do not travel alone, of course. Each moves with an entourage of sophisticated support craft, which means each carrier is a floating fortress that can bring Israel's foes to their knees. And that's just the beginning. Our next report tells you about the firepower that America has deployed to help Israel.
The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group is now in the region, led by the largest aircraft carrier in the world. We've augmented U.S. fighter aircraft squadrons in the Middle East, and the U.S. Department of Defense stands fully ready to deploy additional assets if necessary.
And that is why we also just recently announced that the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower carrier and her escort ships will be heading that way to be available for regional deterrent operations.
2 American aircraft carriers will soon be positioned in the waters near Israel. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower is on its way. It left American shores on Saturday. It's expected to reach the eastern Mediterranean in a few days. It'll join the USS Gerald R. Ford that's already stationed there. How deadly are both carriers? Let's take a look. The USS Gerald R. Ford carries 4 F/A-18 Super Hornet fighter squadrons. That's about 40 Super Hornets. The Eisenhower has a similar number of F/A-18s. These combat jets are outfitted with rotary cannons, air-to-air missiles, and air-to-surface missiles, everything needed for dogfights and airstrikes. But it's not just Super Hornets that the US is bringing in these carriers. There are electronic warfare aircraft, command and control aircraft, a fleet of helicopters. Combined, the 2 carriers bring over 150 aircraft. Then there are the other ships that are part of each carrier's entourage. The Ford travels with a cruiser, the USS Normandy. It also has 4 destroyers in its strike group. The warships are armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles and can pack a serious punch. The Eisenhower also travels with 1 cruiser and 3 destroyers. Basically, both carriers are mobile bases capable of bombing enemy nations into submission. And that's just one part of the American deployment around Israel. The US has bases all over West Asia, both in Israel and friendly Arab nations. American Air Force jets are flying to all these bases in a show of force. F-16, A-10, and F-15E squadrons in the region are being augmented by more jets. Their size has almost been doubled in the last few days. Even before the arrival of the Eisenhower, the US has around 100 fighter jets at the ready. All this is for deterrence. They're a warning to Israel's enemies. If anyone attacks Israel, the US can join the war at a moment's notice.
As we speak, most headlines focus on West Asia, on the war in West Asia, but that's not the only war going on in the world right now. Among others is Ukraine. It's day 600 of the war in Ukraine. Their president fears oblivion. Reports say Zelensky is trying to go to Israel. He hasn't managed to get a date yet, but his adversary has. That's Vladimir Putin. He's traveling not to Israel, though, but to China. And this is significant. Putin has barely stepped out of Russia since he invaded Ukraine. So this is a rare international visit for him, and it's for a special occasion. This week, China is holding the BRI Forum, the Belt and Road Initiative Forum. It was supposed to be a grand affair, but the war in West Asia seems to have dimmed its sheen. As the leaders meet, the focus will be on Israel and Hamas, and the big question will be this: where do Russia and China stand on the war? Let's start with Moscow. They should not be complaining. The war in West Asia means distraction. The world has something else to talk about. The headlines no longer care about Ukraine, and that's a plus for Vladimir Putin. Also, the West is now busy elsewhere. They're rallying behind Israel. They're sending arms and pledging support. Of course, Russia hopes that this would mean less support for Ukraine, but the US says that won't happen. America says it can support both Israel and Ukraine. It's a good promise to make, but it will be harder to keep, because if this war drags on, it will test America's capacity as an ally. And Moscow is counting on that. Plus, it is slamming Washington's role in West Asia.
It is obvious that this US policy in the Middle East is a failure. Why do I think that? Because like I said now at the session, the United States has practically moved away from the previous international instruments for resolving this issue, which included several countries. One of them was Russia.
So distraction from Ukraine and a blow to the West. But that's not all that Russia cares about. It is also trying to play the role of mediator. Putin was asked about this. Listen to what he said.
We have very stable business relations with Israel. We have had friendly relations with Palestine for decades. Our friends know about this. And Russia, in my opinion, could also make its contribution to the peace process.
You heard that. Today, Russia spoke to 5 major stakeholders in the conflict. This includes Iran and other Arab nations. So Moscow is looking to play peacemaker, but it's not the only one. Its close friend China is eyeing the same role. When the Hamas attack first happened, Beijing condemned it, but it did not mention Hamas. China then talked about the two-state solution. It talked about peace in West Asia and how it can only be achieved with the creation of a Palestinian state.
The root cause of the Palestinian issue lies in the fact that Palestine's long-cherished wish to establish an independent state has not been realized. The way out lies in the founding of an independent Palestinian state, that is, implementing the two-state solution and realizing the peaceful coexistence of Palestine and Israel.
On October 15, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi spoke to his Saudi counterpart and he said that Israel is acting beyond self-defense. Wang Yi also said that Beijing was ready to work with Riyadh to support Palestine. China's special envoy will also visit the region this week.
I will visit relevant countries next week in the Middle East to further strengthen coordination with all parties concerned, with a goal to cease fighting, protect civilians, ease the situation, and push forward peace talks.
China wants to broker peace, and it does have some experience, especially in West Asia. This year, China brokered a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this is the Israel-Palestine conflict. It has too much history. It has too many stakeholders. It may not be that easy. That said, neither Russia nor China will benefit from a wider conflict in West Asia. They don't want a full-blown war, especially one where they will have to take sides. So this war at the moment has provided a new opportunity for both Russia and China, for Russia to make the most of a distracted West and for China to ride the public sentiment, to capitalize the wave of solidarity for Palestine and to play a bigger role in West Asia. But if the conflict escalates, if the US enters it militarily, Russia and China will be forced to pick a side. I'm not sure that's what they want at the moment. So Russia and China are taking a stand. What about India? New Delhi was proactive to begin with. Prime Minister Narendra Modi condemned the Hamas attack. He called it what it was, a brutal terrorist assault. He also expressed solidarity with Israel. And Prime Minister Netanyahu clearly appreciated it because days later he called Prime Minister Modi. He updated him on Israel's operation. But beyond that, what is India's role here? Well, one concern is evacuations. New Delhi has launched Operation Ajay. 2 batches of Indian nationals have been brought back to India. We've done so in the past as well. India has evacuated citizens from Ukraine, from Sudan, from Yemen and Lebanon. But those were logistical operations. What about the political ones? The ones that involve taking sides or trying to mediate in a conflict. That's where India appears to be reluctant. After the attack, New Delhi called it terrorism. Yet Hamas has not been redesignated in India. India has still not declared it as a terrorist group. Now, obviously, this raises questions. How can a non-terror group carry out a terror attack? That's problem number 1, the lack of clarity. Problem number 2 is the lack of initiative. There's a lot of diplomacy happening right now, but India is not in the room. New Delhi has close ties with Israel, Iran and the Arab world. No one else does. The US doesn't talk to Iran. China says Israel has gone too far. So who remains? India. But India has not leveraged its position. Our statements have been generic, like tackling all forms of terrorism or sticking to the long-standing demand for a Palestinian state. The problem is, this war is not about all forms of terrorism, it's about Hamas's terrorism. Similarly, this war is not about Palestinian statehood. New Delhi has always supported the two-state solution. Diluting it was never in question. But why not dehyphenate it? Why not separate Hamas and Palestine? US President Joe Biden has said that Hamas is not Palestine. So has the European Union. Even the UAE has criticized Hamas. Abu Dhabi called last Saturday's attack a grave escalation. So why is New Delhi half-hearted? In the past, there were valid reasons. Let's go back to the 1940s and 50s. The newly independent India was a strong advocate of Palestine. Sure, you can say it was based on principle. But it was a practical choice too. Indian leaders were wary of West Asia's support to Pakistan. After all, Pakistan was a Muslim country. It was also 100% behind Palestine. So India did not want to alienate Arab nations. But that was 7 decades ago. Today, India's ties with the Arab world have evolved. They're not centered on Palestine. They're built around trade, economy, and strategy. And the Saudi Crown Prince alluded to this. He was on a state visit to India last month. He told Prime Minister Modi, there are no disagreements between New Delhi and Riyadh. No disagreements. So India can afford to be more vocal and more involved. That's what world powers do. And on terrorism, India has an added responsibility. We have been victims of such attacks. We've lost hundreds of civilians and soldiers. So if India doesn't speak out, who will? That does not mean abandoning the Palestinian cause or giving Israel the license to flatten Gaza. It means drawing clear red lines on what is acceptable. And terrorism certainly isn't. My point is, India needs to behave its size. We are the 5th largest economy and a nuclear power. We have massive stakes in this fight. You may know about oil and the economic corridor. But there's something else too. Around 900 Indian soldiers are deployed at the Israel-Lebanon border. The United Nations peacekeepers, 900. They guard 110 kilometers of the border between Israel and Lebanon. But this time, we also need to build peace, not just keep it. You can't just evacuate citizens and sit on the sidelines. You need to take a stand. Vantage continues after a short break.
About 3 families, 4 families.
3-4 families. They have also fled.
Yeah.
So 3-4 Indian families from Zerot, they have also fled, and they were part of the community here.
Yeah.
So you see, the entire city of Sidrot has been become like a ghost town. There are streets, houses well built, nice streets, and you will not see any single person who is still living there. Very few people like Etna, they have not fled from the spot. They believe in God and they think that probably the Almighty will save them once again and for all. The town of Sidrot, which used to be very hustling, bustling, wears a very deserted look. Streets are empty. Free any emergency vehicle or people who have been, some of the media people also visiting the place. But mostly the citizens of this city, they have fled, fearing their security and safety, and also that the security establishment of Israel asked them to leave because they feared that many of the Hamas terrorists could be hiding in the garb of being citizen of the city. So almost like say have fled from the city. The shops are closed, the schools have been closed. You will not find anybody around the place. All people fled from the city.
Yes.
Most of the people have fled from the city. People have not even cleared this debris of the blast that happened on 7th of October mostly, and because most of the town is empty now, people have fled, so nobody is there to take care of the stuff, nobody is there to take care of the cleaning, and it looks like a weird vibe in this town. Everything is all good, houses are nice, streets are clean, but there is no one who is living here. It's a weird feeling walking in a town which could have been a very busy and normal and active place, but right now it's very nicely planned, well-built city with greeneries, clean streets and nice houses, but tragically there is nobody who is living right now here. And this is the town of Sderot, which was under heavy attack from Hamas terrorists on 7th of October of the thousands of rockets that were fired from Gaza targeting Israeli cities.
This war has also reignited an old debate. Who is a terrorist? Whatever the definition, you'd think Hamas qualify. They killed more than 1,400 innocent Israelis. Even children were not spared. If that's not terrorism, I don't know what is. But tell that to the BBC. They don't call Hamas terrorists. They call them Palestinian militants or fighters. And the British Prime Minister has a problem with that. Here's what his officials are saying, and I'm quoting. The Prime Minister has said repeatedly that Hamas are not militants, they are terrorists. It is incumbent on our national broadcaster to recognize that. The national broadcaster is the BBC. And it's not just Rishi Sunak. One of the hostages taken by Hamas is the mother of a therapist in London. He wants the BBC to change its policy to call Hamas terrorists. So why don't they do it? Why don't they call them terrorists? Well, the BBC's position was explained by their World Affairs editor, John Simpson. Listen to his justification. This is what he said. Terrorism is a loaded word which people use about an outfit they disapprove of morally. It's simply not the BBC's job to tell people who to support and who to condemn. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? How about that? It is not the BBC's job to tell people who the good guys are. But guess what? The job has been flipped because people are now telling the BBC who the bad guys are. And among them is the British Prime Minister. And frankly, it's not that tough. If you kill children, you are not one of the good guys. If you massacre a village, same thing. Yet many groups find it difficult to accept that Hamas is a terror group. I know some people romanticize the concept. They say one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. They are wrong too. Killing innocent civilians is not a fight for freedom, it is bloodlust. And this happens across the world. Consider the situation in Kashmir. In February 2019, the Pulwama attack happened. A bus carrying Indian security officials was bombed. 40 of them were killed. And what did the BBC say? That militants attacked the bus. Not terrorists, but militants. We're talking about the Jaish-e-Mohammed here, a bona fide terrorist group, one that is sanctioned and listed by the United Nations Security Council, yet the BBC call them militants. Do you see the problem here? Words determine the scale and seriousness of the attack. A terrorist is different from a militant. Let's look at the dictionary definitions. Who is a terrorist? Someone who uses violence for political purposes. And who is a militant? Someone who is determined and often willing to use force. So there is a clear difference. When you call a terrorist a militant, you downplay their threat. It's like calling a heart attack a chest pain. Technically, you're not wrong, but in reality, there is a huge difference. So what's the solution here? To be honest, we are very far from any solution because there is no agreement on the definition. There is no globally accepted definition of what is terrorism or who is a terrorist. As a result, you get different versions. For some, they are freedom fighters. For others, like the BBC, they are militants. India has highlighted this problem at the United Nations. It said that the UN is yet to agree on a common definition, let alone craft a coherent policy on terrorism. It tells you why we need a definition. Because you cannot tackle something that you can't even define. I know that circumstances are different everywhere, so is the history and the experiences, but those factors cannot justify actions of violence, because then you're on a slippery slope. Just think about it. Assume that we accept the fact that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Great. But then, who defines what freedom is? What if one man's freedom is another man's tyranny? So don't let causes or history color your definitions. A terrorist is a terrorist because of their actions, because of their choices. Calling them anything else is an insult to the victims. In a war, no matter who wins, both parties suffer. We know that by now, and the fallout is hardly limited to them. There are global repercussions of any conflict. And the war between Israel and Hamas is no different. In the last 1 week, there has been an uptick in hate crimes the world over. The most shocking case came from the US. A 71-year-old man allegedly stabbed a boy 26 times. I'll repeat that. And this was a 6-year-old boy. A 6-year-old child stabbed 26 times. What was his crime? He was a Palestinian Muslim. And as horrifying as it is, this is not an isolated story. Cases of anti-Semitism have shot up too. Jews are being targeted in many parts of the world. Our next report tells you more.
This is Wadea Al-Fume. He celebrated his birthday just a few weeks ago. He turned 6. He lived in the state of Illinois in the United States with his family. He loved playing sports, especially football and basketball. He was like any other young boy. But this weekend, he was stabbed to death by his own landlord, a 71-year-old man named Joseph Zuba. He stabbed the boy 26 times with a military knife. And what was Al-Fume's crime? He was a Muslim.
It's heartbreaking. And again, it's because it's in this community. He had nothing to do with it. All because he was an innocent child. He was Muslim. That's what happened. He was Muslim, and this is what they did. This is what this monster did.
Al-Fume may have been in the US, but his death is the result of a war in West Asia, the Israel-Hamas war that broke out last week. His mother was attacked too. She was stabbed over a dozen times by the same culprit. Fortunately, she survived. She's from the West Bank, and she came to the US over a decade ago.
But we're seeing a lot of this. A lot of, on social media, us being attacked. In person, social media, it's going to happen. You're going to see more and more of this.
The alleged attacker has been charged with murder and hate crime. US President Joe Biden reacted to the incident. He said, "This horrific act of hate has no place in America." Such an act should have no place anywhere. Yet, hate fueled by the Israel-Hamas war is spilling over across the world, especially in Europe, which has seen a rapid surge in hate crimes and online threats. Just last week, a teacher in France was stabbed to death. President Emmanuel Macron condemned it as barbaric Islamic terrorism. Last week, France recorded over 100 anti-Semitic incidents. For the whole of last year, the number stood at 436. More than 2,000 cases of anti-Semitic speech were reported last week.
We are now going to be afraid all the time. That's it. My daughter will leave to go to school, and we don't know what will happen next.
Similar incidents of anti-Semitism in the UK more than quadrupled last week. The country saw 89 incidents compared to 21 last year. That's a fourfold increase. Some Jewish schools were shut down because clearly even children aren't safe. In the US, the FBI has seen an increase in reported threats. Jewish and Muslim institutions have been targeted. Incidents are sporadic but persistent. Meanwhile, in the online world, they are simply surging. There's been an alarming rise in online chatter amongst neo-Nazis and pro-Hamas extremists. Online threats in the US increased by 488% within the first 18 hours of the first day of the attack by Hamas.
We No, the entire world is horrified by the attacks the terrorist organization Hamas has made on our brothers and sisters in Israel. And we are deeply disturbed by the message of hate, urging violence in other communities in this region and around the world. It is not acceptable.
Now France is on its highest security alert. Countries like the US, the UK, Germany and Australia have amped up their security measures. Even countries where such hate crimes aren't rampant are on high alert. Because as unacceptable as it is, this is the reality. A country fights a war against terrorists, and innocent people the world over become collateral damage.
For our last story tonight, let's change tracks, take a break from the hate and war and the stories of death and talk about hope. I think we can all do with this. Our story begins with India's mini Kabul. It is tucked in the capital city of Delhi, home to thousands of Afghans who fled their country over the years. Also the best place to go if you want to savor some Afghani food. Usually on a Sunday, this locality is bustling with visitors. But this Sunday was different. This Sunday, shops were closed in mini Kabul. Do you know why? Because everyone was watching cricket. Afghanistan was playing against England in the World Cup and the match was happening in New Delhi. So many residents had bought tickets and some got them from the players. The others were glued to their screens. It was quite a clash. On one side was Afghanistan, winner of only one World Cup match in its entire history. On the other side was England, the defending world champion. They'd won the last cup, England. So it was supposed to be a no contest really. Also, Afghanistan's record was not so great. They'd lost 16 out of their last 17 World Cup games. It should have been a cakewalk for England, but they were in for a shock because the Afghans did the unimaginable. They hammered the world champions, defeating England in their own sport and creating one of the greatest upsets in World Cup history. The victory was unlike any other. Indians and Afghans joined in cheering the players. People ran with Afghan flags in Delhi metro trains. College campuses were filled with excited crowds. It was an emotional day. The world over, people hailed Afghanistan as the dark horse of cricket. You see, they come from a country that is devastated by war. The Taliban took power 2 years ago. It changed everything for them, lives, jobs, education, and the sporting landscape. This is a country where kite flying is banned. And what is not banned is left to chance. It suffers under poor funding and strict Taliban control. The Afghan Cricket Board Council is as good as dead. Sponsors have pulled out. So cricketers have no monetary assistance and no infrastructure. They train in foreign countries like the UAE. Their home stadium is here in India. They have little continuity when it comes to coaches. Afghanistan have had more than 5 head coaches since 2019. None of them travel to the country. They train players on away tours. So Afghan cricketers face unique challenges, yet they keep chugging on. And that's what makes this victory very special. Plus for the players, the challenges at home can be overwhelming. Only last week, Afghanistan was devastated by a powerful earthquake. It struck on October 7th. The magnitude was more than 6.3. And since then, 2 more quakes have ravaged the nation. More than 2,000 people have died so far. More than 90% of them are women and children. Against this harrowing backdrop, Afghan cricket players won for their country. And I know when thousands of people die, a sport can feel insignificant. But Afghanistan's win had the very opposite effect. On Sunday, the nation's joy knew no bounds. Star spinner Rashid Khan said this. He said, "Cricket is the only source of happiness in Afghanistan." He dedicated the win to people back home. This is the power of sports. It can be so liberating. It can be a great source of hope and happiness. Its underdog stories never cease to inspire, and the examples are endless, like when boxer Buster Douglas won against the legendary Mike Tyson, or in 1976 when Mark Edmondson, ranked 212, won the Australian Open. Sports also binds people together. In a fractured world, it can act as a connective tissue. During the 23rd Winter Olympics opening ceremony in South Korea, athletes from North and South Korea marched together. Many call this the most dramatic gesture of reconciliation between the two countries in a decade. Sports is the home ground of underdogs, and as Afghanistan joins its ranks, we both congratulate and thank them. What they have achieved is humbling and awe-inspiring. Even in these difficult times, they've become a symbol of hope. And in this lies the power of sports. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story, and there's no bigger story right now than the war in West Asia. In Israel, a parliament session was interrupted by air raid sirens. In Germany, a vigil for victims was disrupted by pro-Palestine protesters. And in Gaza, a young boy had to take refuge in a United Nations school due to airstrikes. But he took his most prized possession along, his pet bird, whom he refused to abandon. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
ושם מצאו את מותם. אבל בתוך זה...
אזעקה? סדרנים,
יש אזעקה, לדעתי. בואו.
אוקיי, לצאת בבקשה למסדרון, ואני מחדש את הדיון לאחר ההפסקה, לידיעה, עוד לא ראיתי במו עיניי, אבל...
لا تحصل أي مشاكل أخرى نحن في غد
Let me start with asking you, the events of October 7th, for you personally, I'm sure it's still etched in your memory. It's perhaps images you won't ever be able to forget in the rest of your lifetime. When you saw those pictures, what was running through your head? What was going through your mind? Just the brutality of the terrorists unleashing mayhem on women and children and the elderly. What was running through your mind when you saw those pictures?
Yes, so it's very difficult